with only 9 days until the referendum, nobody needs to be reminded just how close the polls are at the moment. I'll be joined in a second by the First Minister, but immediately after this broadcast, you'll have the opportunity to post questions for Alex Salmond on his Facebook page. So have a think about any questions that you'd like him to answer. First Minister, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
I'm looking forward to the posting of the Facebook questions and answering them, of course.
And me too. 50-50, according to the polls. It's incredibly close. What do you think the state of play is at the moment as far as the Scottish electorate are concerned?
Well, I mean, all politicians love opinion polls when they're going well, and clearly the polls are now going well. But my encouragement with this campaign has got very little to do with the polls. The polls are just reflecting what's happening in the communities around Scotland. And my encouragement is this incredible engagement, this empowerment experience that's going on, this joyful, almost celebration of politics that's going on right around our country. That is fantastic. And I feel the movement towards, yes, I feel people are realising that next Thursday we can take the future of our country into our hands.
Now, as we speak, we've just heard that the three Westminster party leaders are coming north of the border tomorrow. We don't know exactly what they're going to do, but apparently they're going to hold a joint press conference and appeal to the people of Scotland not to leave. This is an extraordinary moment, not just in Scottish politics, but British politics. I can't think of a similar occasion where they've come together like this.
I was thinking of sending them their bus tickets, but I suspect they're not coming by bus. So, but I can't think of a more symbolic panic button gesture than the Westminster gang coming together, last minute gasp effort to try and tell Scotland what to do and what not to do. There's two things that are really working for us in this campaign. One is that the positive empowerment message. It's by far the most important thing. But there's also a running contempt for the Westminster system right across Scotland. Actually, I feel it in England as well. I felt it in Liverpool when I spoke there in the campaign, in Newcastle and Carlisle. So there's a huge contempt for the Westminster system. David Cameron is the most unpopular Prime Minister in British history in Scotland, even more unpopular than Margaret Thatcher was. Ed Miliband is the most distrusted Labour leader ever in Scotland from Westminster. So to combine these two characters, and Nick Clegg's off the scale, incidentally. To combine Cameron and Miliband, join them at the hip, Labour and Tory together from Westminster to come up and deliver a message to the people of Scotland is just about the most disastrous, last-ditch, last-minute piece of panic that I've ever seen.
George Osborne and Gordon Brown have both said in the last 24 hours that if Scots vote no, there will be, in effect, Devo Max. Now, for people who don't know what Devo Max is, that is independence over most financial policies, although not all, but no control over foreign policy or indeed the military. A lot of Scots might be tempted by that, might they not?
Well, of course, we're expected to believe that David Cameron, whose one red line in this whole referendum business was to keep Devo Max off the ballot paper. That was the red line that Westminster drew. Having managed to do that in the circumstances of a no vote, would concede what he was so determined to keep off the ballot paper in 2011 and 2012. And of course the difficulty is for them, we've now found out there isn't anything on offer, far less Devo Max. In fact, the position of the Labour Party is they want to devolve about a fifth, 20% of the Scottish revenue to the Scottish Parliament. I think people in Scotland will come to the conclusion that we want financial control so that we can create jobs, so that we can defend our public national health service, and so we can build a more prosperous but also a more just society. So nothing they can say or do now can compare with the opportunity, this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that independence in this referendum offers a yes vote. Do
you think you've neutralised the pound as an issue in this campaign?
I think people are coming to the conclusion, as Joseph Stiglitz did, the Nobel laureate, that the Westminster parties are bluffing. And I think to a great extent that the panic in these parties that was seen probably indicates why sterling was under pressure at the start of this week. Because what people see is two things. One, how important Scotland is in terms of our contribution in oil and gas and whisky and the range of Scottish exports to sterling, about 40, 50 billion pounds a year. And secondly, When the markets detect that note of total and utter panic we've seen at the heart of Westminster governments, then they tend to react in that fashion. So actually I think we've seen a glimpse of panic in the bristi of the Westminster establishment, and therefore the pound, far from becoming a positive for their campaign, is becoming yet another negative. Interesting enough, not the only one. I mean, before, when the campaign started, their two big things were the pound and Europe. They haven't said anything about Europe in this campaign because that has become a negative for them as well. It's very interesting. What's happening is that the issues which really matter to people, jobs, the health service, the future of Scotland, are the ones which now predominate in the streets and communities of our country.
Looking back, don't you think perhaps that a separate currency might have been an easier sell to the Scottish electorate?
No, I think people recognise that we have a range of currency options, but we should take the most sensible option, which is to keep our own currency, a common sense agreement for a common currency. I think what's been important and why we are winning this argument is to spell out what the range of options that Scotland has. We have a range of very good options, but our best option, the thing that's best for Scotland and for the rest of the United Kingdom, is to keep the same currency for the very simple reason that England's our biggest export market, and Scotland is their second biggest export market after America. And under these circumstances, it's common sense to have a common currency.
Talking about the English, the Welsh First Minister is touring Scotland at the moment, and he's saying that he would like to veto Scotland's use of the common currency. Do you think the English and the Welsh and the Northern Irish have any right to be consulted on a shared currency if Scotland votes yes?
Well, he doesn't get consulted at the present moment, I can tell you that. In fact, I was sitting at a very interesting meeting in Downing Street a few months back where Cameron Jones was making it absolutely clear that unless he got the borrowing powers to complete a motorway to Wales, then he wasn't going to be very obliging as far as the no campaign were. So I think I congratulate the Welsh First Minister in getting his motorway. But I think he'll find it a very difficult message to sell in the streets and byways around Scotland. We're operating in the best interests of the Scottish people, but it's also in the best interests of the rest of the United Kingdom. It encapsulates actually what's in the Edinburgh Agreement, the agreement between myself and the Prime Minister, which set up this entire referendum. And that is, of course, that everybody should accept the result, and then after the result, do what's in the interests of Scotland, but also the rest of the United Kingdom.
If they said, we're going to organise a referendum in England, Wales and Northern Ireland to see if we all share a currency, would you think that would be a fair thing to do?
Well, obviously the people in the rest of the UK can do as they wish, but I mean, I think it would be a very daft thing to do because they have a common currency with Scotland at the present moment. I've got a kind of simple rule for referendum, that you should have a referendum to ask for the assent, the permission of the people to do something. To make a change, to make a difference, independence for Scotland, you should have a referendum. I think it's very silly to have a referendum not to do something. It's a bit like David Cameron in Europe at the present moment. Now, he doesn't want, the last thing David Cameron wants to do, incidentally, is withdraw the UK from the European Union. But he's been forced, because of internal divisions in his party, to offer a referendum to do something he doesn't want to do. And as a result, he's lost control totally of the political process. So you should have a referendum when you want to do something. The people of England, Wales and Northern Ireland, they're sharing the currency with us at the present moment. What we're proposing is they continue with that arrangement in the circumstances of an independent Scotland.
Last night's poll showed that the yes campaigners were ahead in most demographic groups. But one stubborn one seems to be old people. I'm guessing that a lot of old people are worried about pensions. What can you do to reassure old people that their pensions are safe and to encourage them to move from the no camp to the yes camp?
I don't think it's that at all, actually. I think we've still got work to do to persuade people of my generation and above that independence is the right thing to do for the future of their children and their grandchildren. I think as John Swinburne, the pensioners' champion, said this week, pensions we know are safe in an independent Scotland. They're safe because we administer the pensions from Scotland in Motherwell and Dundee. Every single public pension in Scotland is administered from these centres. And also because we are committed to improve the lot of pensioners. I don't think it's that, the message we have to get across,
so
to
what
persuade.
Is it?
I think it's to talk about the future. I think now we know that pensions are safe. What I think is going to galvanise even more support from people 60 plus in Scotland is to think about where their children and grandchildren are going to be. I really do think that that generation are motivated by thinking about the future. I mean, to a great extent, people of my generation politically, you know, we had our chance. We're about to get this amazing opportunity next week. But in terms of the politics that went before, I mean, I was involved as a young man in the 1979 referendum, believe it or not. And Scotland had a great opportunity then, which unfortunately we didn't take with enough enthusiasm. We voted yes, but not by a big enough margin. And we were promised then, of course, way back then by Alec Douglas-Hume, a very dignified ex-Conservative Prime Minister, on the eve of poll, that if we voted no, if people voted no, then the Conservatives would offer an hour better assembly, better parliament for Scotland. What we got instead, of course, was 18 years of Tory government, Margaret Thatcher's deindustrialisation of Scotland, the poll tax to boot. But that generation, my generation of young political activists, we had our opportunity and we missed it. And I think what will persuade more of my generation and above to think about voting yes, to move towards yes, as so many have already done, is to think about what the future beckons for the next generation and for their grandchildren, the sort of society that we can build in Scotland, not overnight, but with great work over a period of time to build a better, more fairer country. That is the message. And so what I'm suggesting is that the grandchildren of Scotland contact the grannies and grandfathers, that the children of Scotland contact the mothers and fathers by email or whatever means, by Facebook, and say, look, let's have a talk about the future. Because every generation up until my generation are, by majority, now persuaded that that is the best future for Scotland as a yes vote.
So Simon Jenkins, the writer and commentator, has said that one of the best things Scots could do for the English now is to persuade them to get rid of Trident. What will you do if the rest of the UK government, after a yes vote, says there's nowhere for Trident to go south of the border?
Well, they could put Trident south of the border. I mean, the Trident can go to Devonport. I think we can be pretty confident on track record they won't take it to the River Thames, but they could put it in somewhere considered by London to be remote enough to have Trident nuclear submarines. That is doable, and that's why we've given 5.5 years from now for the removal of Trident submarines.
Are there any circumstances in which Trident would be used as a negotiating tool? Let us share a common currency and we'll keep Trident for a bit longer?
None.
That's a firm commitment?
Absolutely. Trident
goes.
But your point was, could the rest of the UK decide to keep it? Well, they could. I hope they don't. I think, like Simon Jenkins, it's a useless, immoral, hyper-expensive weapon system that is totally out of keeping, either with any terms of international contribution in terms of defence, but more appropriately out of keeping with the UK's status in the world. However, they might decide to keep it. I suspect that they certainly won't decide to renew it, which is the decision that's now being embarked upon. But if they do decide to keep it, then there's nothing we can do to stop it. What we can do, of course, is to make sure as a nation of 5.25 million people that we don't host Europe's largest concentration of weapons of mass destruction, and we can use the money, which otherwise we'd have to spend on that, for much. I mean, I can think of 1,000 things to do better than to spend money on weapons of mass destruction. And lastly, of course, there is an additional economic bonus. I mean, I think the moral argument about nuclear weapons is the predominant one, but there's an economic bonus that the removal of Trident from the River Clyde will open up that whole western reaches of Scotland to the oil and gas exploration, which would have been there if Trident hadn't been there, and would by now have been generating tens of thousands of jobs. So we get the Clyde out of quarantine as far as the development of our natural resources is concerned.
A lot of our Scandinavian members are members of NATO, and you want Scotland to be like them as a non-nuclear NATO member. But they operate a kind of don't ask, don't tell policy, don't they, in effect, that nuclear armed subs can visit their waters and they just don't ask. Would Scotland be in that position, or would Scotland refuse to allow nuclear subs in Scottish waters? Well,
you should remember, of course, there are no nuclear-armed surface ships in the American fleet in normal circumstances. George Bush Sr. Did that many, many years ago. In terms of submarines, by definition, one of the reasons for having nuclear submarines is you cannot detect the nuclear submarines. That's why the Trident fleet.
But you can ask.
But well,
if you're the head of government.
yeah, and there's a convention about what you should do. I mean, what we're able to do as a country is to insist that we will not be the host of our own nuclear weapons, or for that matter, anyone else's nuclear weapons. That is the policy pursued by 20 of the 28 member countries of NATO, and 25 of them, of course, are non-nuclear countries themselves. So if we pursue the same policy as we should, as Norway, as Canada, as Denmark, then I think that would be an effective contribution. We will contribute to NATO as a non-nuclear member, recognising our responsibilities for collective defence, but not either hosting our own nuclear weapons or anyone else's.
How can you be sure that Scotland would be allowed to remain a member of the European Union, that the Spanish or the Belgians, who have their own national minorities within these two states, wouldn't operate a veto?
Well, we're engaged in a consensual process, a consented referendum, agreed between myself and David Cameron through the Edinburgh Agreement. And it's very interesting that the new incoming President of the Commission, Mr Juncker, as in contrast to his predecessor, it may be said, but he's the man who's coming in, has made it clear that that democratic process should be respected. Now, Pat Cox, former President of the European Parliament, today made a very important intervention in this debate, saying not only would that be happen, but also that 18 months was a perfectly viable timescale, the 18 months between Scotland's vote for independence and us becoming an independent nation in the spring of 2016. But, you know, we can go through lots of legalities, but I think you can answer this question with 4 figures. The figures are 1, 20, 25 and 60. The figure 1 is our percentage of the European Union's population. We are 5 million people, there's 500 million in the European Union. The figure 20 is our share of the fish stocks of the European Union. Scottish Waters have 20% of the fish stocks. The figure 25 is our share of the potential of offshore renewable energy and electricity in the European Union, offshore wind and wave and tidal power. That's 20-25% of the European Union's capability, of the whole continent of Europe. And 60 is our share of the oil reserves of the entire European Union. So this country, 1% of the population, there's 20% the fish, 25% the renewable energy, and 60% the oil reserves. I think you'd have to have your head zipped up the back to believe that a country of such resources won't be welcome as part of the European family.
You hope and expect that Scotland's going to vote yes next week. Looking ahead to negotiations, if Scotland does vote yes, what do you think will be the biggest areas of disagreement or even conflict between the negotiating teams?
Well, first, let's talk a bit about that situation, because this is a really important point. You see, on September the 18th, you know, for next 9 days, there are two teams operating in Scotland. There's Team Yes and there's the No campaign. And they're all both going to be doing their best to convince our fellow citizens to vote either yes or no. And I hope and believe that the Yes campaign will win. But on September the 19th, in 10 days' time, there's only one team. That's Team Scotland. And I've made it absolutely clear that to enable us to get the best settlement we possibly can, it's vitally important that we access a range of expertise. We involve the third sector in Scotland and the huge expertise that exists there, but also, and crucially, that we involve people from the No campaign. I want to build a negotiating team that's not just Team Scotland Yes, but is genuinely Team Scotland. And I've made that offer, I've made it publicly. Some politicians, the current Secretary of State for Scotland, have made it clear he'll resign and join Team Scotland, and I welcome that.
And Joanne Lamont has said she would as well.
And well, that's very important, and that's good, because just as I've said, look, I'm going to accept the verdict of the Scottish people. I think that these politicians have indicated they will accept the verdict, and it brings Scotland in terms of its political infrastructure together so that we can move forward to get the best possible settlement for our independent country.
Could you really see Alistair Darling sitting down, negotiating currency, continued use of the pound, currency union, after all the things he said about the impossibility of using the pound? It's going to be very difficult for your political opponents, if Scotland does vote yes, to operate this handbrake turn on many of their predictions and policies.
It's not difficult in the slightest. I mean, that's Alistair Carmichael's already applied the handbrake turn, or said he would in these circumstances. Why is it not difficult? Because everybody should agree to accept the verdict of the Scottish people. That's why we're having a referendum. Once you have the referendum, once the polls are in, once the result is counted, once the result is declared, then everything changes. That is the sovereign will of the Scottish people expressed in a consented referendum, and no politician should be frightened of obeying the sovereign will of the Scottish people. They are in charge of this process for the first time in 300 years.
And how does it work?
300 years we've got a democratic opportunity. We've never had a democratic opportunity to do this. The people of Scotland are in control of this process. That, incidentally, is why it's so exciting. You know, that's why folk are queuing up in Dundee to register to vote last week. Something I never thought I would see in my entire political career. People actually queuing up in the street to register to make sure they were voting. Not people and teenagers, incidentally, people in their 40s and 50s. People haven't been on the voters' roll since the poll tax, probably. Voting or registering to vote so as they can enable themselves to be part of this empowering experience. And incidentally, I can tell you, these folk in Dundee weren't queuing up to vote no, they were queuing up to vote yes.
How does it work in practice? You have a team negotiating the pound, a team negotiating the army and how the army's infrastructure and personnel are subdivided. Will you have a political leader heading each negotiating team, regardless of their political party?
Well, broadly, yes. Actually, the heads of agreement you want to have agreed very quickly, and that's been everybody's best interest. They're not actually that difficult to do, the heads of agreement. And then for the detail, you call in sufficient expertise. We've already recruited a number of international experts, people of extraordinary prestige. Nobody has said no to Scotland, incidentally. They've all said yes on the basis that there is a verdict to the Scottish people. None of them, incidentally, have asked us for any money. So it's amazing. Because why would people do that? Because they want to be part of history. Why would we do it? Because we want to have the best possible expertise available to us. Then there's the third sector of Scotland, people like the STUC, our great voluntary sector. They have the detail and the grasp of the issues that really matter to people. They have to be involved to make sure that we have a consistent application of things they call grandfather rights, so that things don't change until we change them in an independent Scotland, that everybody's rights are secure. And then thirdly, and maybe lastly actually, there's the political balance across the political parties to make it clear that nobody's going to be excluded, people are going to be included in this Team Scotland. Now, if you look upon these three ways and you get your heads of agreement, then it's not a difficult process, it just requires willingness on both sides. Now, luckily, we are acting in the terms of an Edinburgh Agreement, where in clause 30 it says quite clearly that both sides will accept the result, whatever it may be, and then both sides will act, both governments, in the best interests of the people of Scotland and the people of the rest of the United Kingdom. That is how we'll proceed.
Now, it's been a long and it's been a very bruising battle, and all of the newspapers, both south and north of the border, with the sole exception of one, are anti-yes. Do you ever, and you of course are the focus of the Yes campaign, do you ever get hurt by any of the personal attacks levied against you?
Well, I think there's one or two who are neutral, as well as the one who is rightly and passionately pro-yes. I tend to take, in these circumstances, I always take recourse to Robert Burns. You know, the more they talk, I'm Kent, the better. So the more they talk, the better I'm Kent. That's the only way to look at it. I mean, people who get, I think it was Attlee that said he only ever looked at the cricket scores. Well, I don't look at the cricket scores, but I look at the football scores and occasionally the racing results. But you're best not to just shrug your shoulders and go on with it. The press have lost the ability to command the political agenda. Their only ability actually lies in the percussion effect on television and radio. This is now a democracy, a true democracy, where the electronic media has taken control away from a few, and the many now have a substantial influence in this debate. Would we have been able to win this debate 20 years ago in the way we're doing now, with the power of influence concentrated in the hands of the press? It would have been much more challenging and much more difficult. But now we're in a totally different ballgame. Because
social media has transformed things, and of course this discussion we're having is being streamed on Facebook.
Well, it is, the truth is out there. And I say to people at meetings, they often, they say, "Oh, this dreadful thing in the Mail," or whatever it is. I mean, the Mail's been doing this for generations. They've tried to dump on every progressive cause for the last 100 years. So therefore, what I say to people in response is not, have a moan about it. why does it matter now? Because we know that each and every one of us, I tell them all at meetings, you know, put your hand up if you're on the internet. Like 99% of people are online. And I say, okay, right, we're all online, we know how to get the facts, we know how to have a debate and a proper debate. So let's just do it. We don't have to worry about the press anymore. We create our own media, our own excitement, our own campaign, and that is what this glorious grassroots campaign is doing in huge and overwhelming fashion.
People watching this now probably most can't imagine what it's like to live in the kind of goldfish bowl that you do, though. You can't nip out to the shops without people presumably...
Depends what you're buying.
without people rubbernecking and staring at you. Do you ever get sick of that?
Well, I get lots of selfies. I honestly say, I don't think I've ever refused to do a selfie, at least knowingly, because I'm a politician who likes to get my picture taken. I mean, I admit it. I'm sorry, that's me. I have known some politicians who find people difficult. You know, they find it difficult because they're shy or because I don't know. And I know some like that, and I know some involved in this campaign on the other side who are like that, incidentally. But I've always wondered about that because, you know, why would you be involved in politics if you don't like people? And I have to say I like people. You get more wisdom from meetings and meeting people on a campaign trail than you ever will have at any point in your life. Why? Because people are distilling into a decision and they will come to you with the point they've been thinking about. Whether it's for, against, or it's a maybe, they will come to you with the point that they have distilled to bring to your attention, and these points are glorious. They are fantastic. They provide you with great ammunition for interviews like this. They provide you with great wisdom, but above all, they provide you with great fun and enjoyment.
Will you run as First Minister if Scotland votes yes?
Yes.
So you'll serve full first term?
Look, beyond that, everything is a presumption, because it's look, this campaign is not about me, the SNP, any politician, any political party. This campaign is about the right of the Scottish people to choose their own government and to guide their own future for a more prosperous country and a fairer society. I mean, I said at a meeting in Arbroath a couple of weeks back, you know, if the Brand Seer was sitting in the audience and said to me, absolutely, you know, I've seen the future and I can tell you, if you stand down as First Minister tomorrow, then Scotland will vote for independence on the 18th of September. I said, absolutely, I would do it. I would shake hands and I would do that straight away. I think the Scotsman said, you know, Salmond plans to resign. It wasn't the point I was making. The point I was making was, for me and for the Yes campaign, this is about the right of the people of Scotland to determine their own future. And it also means the guarantee, one of the real guarantees in this campaign, the guarantee that each and every election in an independent Scotland, people will get the government of their choice, not the government of someone else's choice.
And where will you be when the result comes through? And how do you think you'll feel at that moment if it's a yes vote?
I'll be in Strichen in Aberdeenshire, at Strichen Community Park. A great example of empowerment, local empowerment in the northeast of Scotland that I can think of somewhere, nowhere I would rather be in that circumstance. And I can't think of any group of people on earth I wouldn't trust more with the fate of this country.
You mentioned a while ago that you like a little flutter yourself. There's a man south of the border who I understand has gambled 800,000 on a no vote. Will a little bit of you, as a racing man, feel a tiny bit sorry for him if a no vote comes?
Afraid
if a
not,
yes vote comes through?
Because the counterpart to that in a balanced book is there's probably 800,000 people in Scotland with a pound on in the other direction. So, you know, always back the masses against the classes. Back the 800,000 with their pound on against the one guy in the south of England with his 800,000 pound on. Yes, but you know, it'll be a misfortune for them. You know, to lose Scotland is going to be a huge misfortune for the Prime Minister, as we read. And the Prime Minister said he didn't want to be like George III. You know, George III lost America. He didn't want to be the Prime Minister who lost Scotland, as if Scotland was some sort of property to be lost and found. Well, the guy with his 800,000 bet is approximately in the same position. So I'll take the 800,000 people with their quid on in Scotland backing yes. I suppose that is some sort of incentive for the yes vote, but as well as the future of the country.
Well, perhaps if you'd like to send any of his questions into Facebook, he can do so now, or indeed anybody else, because immediately
Actually,
after this broadcast...
That guy should actually have volunteered for the debates. He should have taken Alistair Darling's place, I think, he should, because he had more at stake.
Because immediately after this broadcast, you'll be able to send in your questions, you'll be able to Facebook your questions for Alex Salmond, the First Minister. So please stay with us for that. But for the moment, Alex Salmond, thank you very much indeed.
Great pleasure, John.
Thank you.